Well, hi, I'm Trinity Vandenaker, and this is Life in the West. Today we're talking about a basically very forgotten influencer of Montana, and this was his love, cattle ranching. He didn't start there, but this was his goal. He absolutely was one of the most influential people as far as cattle breeding in the state of Montana around the turn of the century and a little bit after, and his name was A.B. Cook. When you talk about A.B. Cook and his mansion, one of the questions that needs answering right off the bat was, did he get his money legitimately? Or was his relationship with the Copper Kings and the accusation of him trying to bribe senators in the state of Montana really legit? A.B. Cook was an incredible businessman or a crook? Let's find out. Even though a lot of people don't know who Cook is, his character has been questioned throughout the years. When I first started looking into A.B. Cook, one thing that popped up right away was an article in Missoula that's been written in the recent years. And what that article stated, or implied rather, throughout the whole article is because of the bribery charges in the Clark trial around 1900, either Cook's timing was perfect and just like lucky, or he had to have gotten his money from the Copper King Clark by associating with him and getting paid off for attempting these bribes. And that is what I started off with. And I thought, wow, you know, this Cook guy must be kind of a little bit shady. You know, maybe he had attained his fortune through rather loose morals or loose business character. And that's what started my journey. It all started with the Copper King William Clark in Butte, Montana, who was accused of bribing state senators to vote him into office as United States Senator for Montana. During that trial, A.B. Cook's name was mentioned by a man named Stiff, and Stiff said or accused Cook of attempting to bribe him with Clark's money. I know this gets a little confusing, for $20,000 if he would vote for William Clark. Well, right now I'm in the courthouse in Townsend, Montana, and no, that's not mandatory or anything. I just wanted to come in here to explain what the trial was in Washington, D.C. when Cook went back there to testify for the Clark trial. Cook was a part of the legislature. He was actually the state auditor at the time at the age of 36. And he was called as a witness in Washington for the Clark trial about the bribery of the state senators. One of those senators, Mr. Stiff, accused A.B. Cook of being an agent of Clark. In the Helena paper, I discovered what the actual testimony of Stiff was. Mr. Stiff stated in his testimony that A.B. Cook had invited him up to the Montana Club to have a private conversation. And there at the Montana Club, Mr. Cook had offered him $20,000 to vote for Clark. And then Mr. Stiff had stated that, well, if he would pay $20,000, I mean, he would sure pay $50,000. And Stiff said that Cook told him he would ask Clark and meet him the same day or the next day, one of the two, because there's two different stories on that, and Cook never did. The problem with this is in this very paper and in the testimony up here, you will find it stated here that Mr. Clark's counsel objected to the testimony of Stiff as Cook which is right here, was not proven to be an agent of Mr. Clark, who is the Copper King. And right below here, one of the other senators said that if they couldn't prove that Cook was actually an agent of Mr. Clark, the Copper King, then Stiff's testimony about Cook would be completely worthless. And that's actually what happened. Mr. Faulkner, right here, he was a senator, I don't know where from, but he was one of the defense attorneys, I believe. He asked Mr. Stiff if he was an attorney for the Blackfoot Milling Company, and he stated that he was, and that company was owned by Marcus Daly. Marcus Daly was the other Copper King, as we'll hear in a minute. So because he was an attorney for Daly, and he was an enemy of Clark, it gives him motive to lie about the Cook testimony in the first place. And then when you look at the Cook testimony, you see how well put together Cook was and how well he answered those questions. When looking at this Missoula article, it seems like there's overwhelming evidence, or at least it was kind of implied that there was a lot of evidence that Cook was actually involved in the bribery situation. It's a little confusing because you have to understand the politics. I looked immediately and found that Cook was a Republican, a very involved Republican. And that Clark, the man he was supposedly taking bribes and working for, and to give bribes to other people, was a staunch Democrat at the time. I thought this was odd that he would even be friends with Clark until I discovered one other element. In that time period, you had both Republicans and Democrats, but then you had a split faction of people in Montana on the Democratic side. And whether you were Republican or Democrat, you chose one of these two sides. They were the two Copper Kings. One of them was Daly and the other one was Clark. So you either belonged to the Daly faction or you were in the Clark camp. Once you understand that, you can kind of see why, because it was obvious and Cook admitted to being friendly with Clark. That struck me as odd, being in politics, you don't normally, a Republican doesn't become friendly with the other side. But because every man in Montana, basically, that I found at that time period had to choose either Daly or Clark, then it makes more sense. But I wanted to look at the testimony of Stiff versus Cook, because the only accusation of Cook actually being involved in the bribery himself was direct testimony by Mr. Stiff. It was actually Mr. Stiff's word against Cook's word. Okay, I found in the actual transcripts of the trial Mr. Cook's testimony. That would be A.B. Cook. And in here, he does state that he met Mr. Stiff at the Montana Club, but that this was the conversation. We'll start right here. So Mr. Cook and Mr. Stiff are at the Montana Club, and this is what A.B. Cook is telling us that Stiff told him. He asked me again what I thought about the use of money, and he said he understood that they were offering $10,000 or $20,000 for votes. And then Mr. Foster asked Mr. Cook here, "Mr. Stiff said that?" And Mr. Cook answered, "Yes, sir." And he finally put his hand on his knee this way, and he indicated it. And he got a little closer to me and he said, "How do you stand with the Clark people?" And I said I was very friendly with them. And he says, "I am a married man with a family, and I would like to vote for Mr. Clark, provided I could get enough out of it. If I could get $50,000, I believe I would vote for him." That is two testimonies that conflict but are very close to what happened. To make matters a little bit more complicated, I discovered that there was another A.B. Cook in Helena that actually shared an office with the people who were bribing senators. So that could be confusing, but in the testimony it was told that that was definitely not the A.B. Cook that we are talking about. The one we're talking about was Andrew Braid Cook, and this man's name was obviously not that. So when looking at the testimony of both, as I said, Cook's testimony was very sharp and to the point. Stiff's testimony was definitely not as smooth. He had a few inconsistencies. He kind of hemmed and hawed. He added things in later after the questions were asked, and at the second time and third time he added more things into the answers. So to come out of that, I did not find Stiff's accusation of Cook credible. But there's one other element that I had to check out to see if Cook possibly would be involved with this bribery scheme that evidently won Clark his Senate seat. And that other thing was the money. Did Cook all of a sudden come into a landslide of money at that same time period? Or did he have the means, the business means, the education from the past, the right ties, the right people to make that fortune on his own? Interestingly enough, in the courthouse of Townsend, this is the silos, which is one of the barns that A.B. Cook actually built in this county, was connected to this iconic set of silos.
Spent days and nights right here thinking about the meaning of life and love and why my heart is beating. In the moments where I find my point of view are the moments where I think of you.
After finishing business school, A.B. Cook as a young man came west to Montana in 1883 and became a mule skinner in Billings, hauling supplies by wagon train back and forth from camp to camp. And evidently he was a very sharp man and able to oversee men very well, because he was very quickly put in charge of an entire wagon team. After that job and a short stint as a cowboy on a ranch, he came to Helena, Montana and got a job as a manager for overseeing an entire railroad project. And out of that, he started his own construction company for that purpose. Now, at the same time, you find that he acquires a lot of property in Missoula. It's very lucrative property because it's property where the town of Missoula sits today. There are some references in personal letters, which I can't quite get a hold of right now because of COVID-19 kind of blocking me from getting to the Historical Society. At that same time, it seems that he had some family that actually invested money with him. I would guess, this is total guess, so take this with a grain of salt. At that same time as when he purchased that ground where Missoula is now sitting, they were investing in him as a business, either in his construction business for building railroad or for him buying those lots in Missoula. And those lots, I believe, were very good money makers because he was selling them. He almost sold all of them off by the time 1900 hit and the trial was there. So he sold them off fairly quickly. They were probably very lucrative. And at the same time, he started his own construction company building railroads. And as we know, railroads at that time was big business. So a lot of these contracts, these big contracts that he had for building railroad spur lines, were before the trial of 1900 and the accusations that he was involved with Clark. That doesn't prove that he wasn't involved with Clark. But for me, it definitely gives you a path to where he could have gotten his fortune without any help from Clark. So after all this, let's get down to it. My conclusion is that the word of Stiff against the word of Cook does not prove that Cook was actually an agent of the Copper King, William Clark. And more than that, the more I delve into the Stiff argument and the fact that he was working or was paid at the time by the other Copper King, Marcus Daly. Marcus Daly and William Clark didn't just dislike each other. They were enemies, and enemies in a way that they tried to destroy each other their whole lives. So seeing as Stiff was working for Daly draws a huge amount of skepticism as to why I would believe him. That being the only evidence, and it doesn't appear that anybody actually did believe him, nothing was ever brought against Cook. Nobody ever said anything about that. And as far as the business aspect of Cook, I think Andy Cook had an extraordinary ability to manage men. And he had already started his career on the track to making his fortune at the time of the trial. I don't think he actually needed or desired to take the money of William Clark and use that in an inappropriate way. I honestly don't believe that he did. Another reason I do believe that he was an honorable man was actually because of some things that he did later on in his life. But we're going to get to those in next week or the week after. So you're going to have to stick with me on A.B. Cook. This man, I believe, was one of immense character, extreme brilliance. And he was able to manage businesses all over Canada and Montana, plus New York, that in a way that I can't even dream now with computers. And he did this all by mail. So why does his name get a little tarnished and forgotten nowadays? I think I know that as well, and it has to do with his family after he died. And we're going to get into that. Make sure that you subscribe to this channel if you're on YouTube, or like this page, Life in the West, on Facebook, so that you can stay up. You're going to want to hear the rest of this man's story. It is really worth watching. So I think Cook gets a bad rap, not because of anything he did himself, but because of what his family did after he died. And that brings us to one last thing that I'm going to mention. In the coming weeks, we're going to delve into and discover how this man actually died, because there are rumors all over the place about this man's death. And you know what I found? By talking to his only living relatives, the rumors that I heard of his death were absolutely, completely false. So stay tuned for that. That's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you leave a comment to tell me what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, what you enjoyed and what you didn't enjoy, so that I can improve this experience for you and me, and we can learn together. I'm Trinity Vandenaker. Thanks for joining me this week. I appreciate all your smiling faces and your encouragement, and I will talk to you next week. God bless.